Hi, everyone. The painting department, the GFA department, and the drawing department are very excited to welcome Sarah Crowner, who lives and works in Brooklyn and graduated from Hunters in 2002. Her work has been shown in Lisbon, Berlin, as well as the Contemporary Art Museum in St. Louis, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Detroit, and others. And additional significant group shows include the Whitney Biennial 2010, the last one, and Looking Back at White Columns. Her last show in New York City at Nicole Beauchamp Gallery, which was called Paintings and Pots, to me presented a very lyrical yet rigorous example of the ways in which painting is cracked open and survives and strives through incorporating other disciplines and practices, and how it's disencumbered by a discourse of dominion and purity, and therefore can strive along, through, beside other disciplines. Thank you. Welcome, Sarah Crowner.
Hello, my name is Sarah Crowner. Nice to see you all. 1 second. Okay. I'm going to start by talking about my paintings, and then we're going to move into a quick discussion about my ceramics. I start with a photograph by, it's actually of Sonia Delaunay's work. She, I don't know if you're familiar with her work, but she was married to Robert Delaunay, and she was a painter, but she also dabbled in fashion design, and she was a book illustrator. This is a fantastic piece by her, a coat that she designed, as well as a automobile, actually. I like its sense of humor. So here's a painting by me. This is a painting that's made with a sewing machine, actually, and I'm using cloth, raw linen, and oil paint sewn together. And so parts are painted and parts are sewn here. So you see a detail. You can see sort of how it's created. In my work, I'm appropriating artists from the past. I use art history a lot in my work. And this is a part of a canvas by Lygia Clarke. It's from 1956. And so she, I don't know if you know about her work, but she was from Brazil. And she was a really, what was known as a hard-edged painter. And then she went into doing more installation-based work. But this is a part of one of her paintings. And it's made by cutting, basically I make a pattern or a template out of her composition, and then I cut it up with, I don't cut it up, I take canvas and then cut the pieces of canvas, paint them, and then sew them back together again. So the hard edges become actually sewn. Here's a detail of another one. But this is actually oil paint, raw linen, and then painted again. Here's a detail of one. So you can kind of see, I think it's important to see these details because it shows how they're made, both conceptually and technically. So I'm using an industrial sewing machine. Here's a picture of the exhibition that Fabienne spoke about, Paintings in Pots at Nicole Beauchamp Gallery. I'll talk about some of my pots, which are in the back there, but first I'm going to continue talking about the paintings. So here's that Lygia Clarke painting. This is a painting over on the right, the fleshy one that I showed earlier, by someone called Lorser Feidelson, a Los Angeles-based painter who was working in the 1950s and early 60s. And here is a painting, or a part of a painting by Ola Bartling, a Swedish modernist, 1959. I'm going to explain that right now. So when I say, yeah, I should have explained that a little bit more. So a lot of this work is about appropriation and mixed with craft techniques. And so I'm appropriating compositions from painters from the past, dead or not dead necessarily, but I'm looking at a lot of old art magazines and old art books. This is Victor Vasarely, who's an artist you might know about. He became very commercial later in his life, but this is an early composition, 1953. So I was looking at one of his artist books, and I saw this piece, and I thought this would be a really interesting way to dive. I wanted to learn more about the work, let's say. And so I thought an interesting way to dive into the work and learn more about it would be to cut it up, literally, and recreate it, and then sew it back together again. So that's what I did. Here's my painting, and that was his. So I removed the color and I focused simply on form and geometry. It's the same scale. And this is gouache painted on canvas, sewn back together again. So you can get a sense of how it's made. This is just a picture of my studio from a couple of years ago. So you see these pieces of painted canvas. And then you can see as they look sewn back together again. Some of them up here are a bit wrinkly and need to be stretched better. This is just a casual picture from my studio. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about using other people's compositions. I kind of consider it a dialogue with art history or an imaginary conversation with an artist who may or may not still be alive. But I like the idea that art history is something that's kind of ongoing and it's somehow still alive, and that we can collaborate with it. This is one of my own compositions, actually. This is not appropriated from another artist's body of work. I began this, and this is actually a very small canvas. It's 14 by 18 inches. But I began using the clippings from other larger paintings, or the clippings, the leftovers, the remnants from my studio, and just kind of recycling them and making new compositions. So this is a new painting of mine. This is another new painting of mine, small, 14 by 18 inches. I started doing diptychs. So as you can see, just to talk a little bit more about technique, you have raw linen up here. You have red paint over gessoed canvas, and then this line here is sewn, for example. This black form is painted after the fact, after the sewing over the already stretched canvas. So there are different techniques that I'm using here. Anyway, then I wanted to show you a little bit about the work I did at the Whitney Biennial this year. I became really interested in this photograph, which is a very famous photograph. It's been reproduced a lot. It's Bridget Riley. She's sort of posing in her installation her three-dimensional installation called Continuum from 1965. And it's basically it's a room. It's a spiral-shaped room that you can walk into and enter, almost like a Richard Serra sculpture, but it's these painted panels. And it was destroyed. It was exhibited once, but then it was destroyed. And a lot of people don't know about that. When they think of her body of work, they think of her paintings. They don't know much about her sculpture, let alone her installation. But I really love this photograph, and I love the way that the angles are becoming distorted because of the photograph. So I began to let's say, and I just wanted to investigate more about this body of work, and I really looked at that photograph for a long time, and I ended up making a series of panels here, black and white. These are also sewn. So I'm using the photograph of her work as kind of a template or a pattern for making my own canvases. There's just a couple pictures from my studio. So I think I did about 8 of them, and I ended up presenting 6 of them at the Whitney. And I didn't know how I was going to arrange the paintings on the wall until I got there, and I kind of didn't want to decide that until I got there. So I spent a couple of days almost like treating the wall and treating the paintings as a giant collage and moving them around and rearranging them, and sort of some were stacked and some were leaning against the wall, and and so on. And so I ended up doing this composition on the wall. Here's a couple of details. So as you can see, the lines are quite imperfect, and depending on the way that the canvas is then stretched around the stretchers, certain lines become slightly distorted, and I kind of like that element of chance. You can't really predict exactly how they're going to look, and it's also looking at this kind of period of a very rigorous, hard-edged geometry and making it more soft or human or handmade, and sort of like allowing the element of chance to come in. So this is just a wide shot, so you can kind of see it in its context. Lately, I've been interested. It says as I'm explaining, I'm really looking a lot at art history as inspiration, but also I'm really thinking of art history as a medium, the way that paint or clay is a medium, something that I can use and work with, the way that I would, sculpt a pot or something, but really something that's fluid and malleable. Anyway, this is a futurist. These are some stills from a futurist film. You might know of the moment in art history called Futurism, and this is from 1916. It's a film called Ties. It's an Italian film, and these are some pictures of the sets, which I thought were very modern and really modern, actually. And I was really surprised to see them, and I became very inspired by them. I like the symmetry of the sort of that still at the bottom right with the triangles. It actually kind of recalls Bridget Riley in a way. So I'm starting now to do a series of paintings that are based on, or thinking about, or looking at kind of early modernist theater, and sort of imagining if I were back. I don't know exactly what I'm imagining, but they have to do with stage sets, and they have to do with props and theater curtains and backdrops. And so these are just a couple of recent paintings. They're mid-sized. And here's a side view, just so you can kind of see how they're made. You see a sewn line, and then you see a painted line, and then you see the raw canvas. And you can kind of see from this angle that the paint comes after. So there's this real, the work is really about process. And when you look at the paintings, you realize that they're really more objects than flat paintings, and hopefully you get a sense of the process there. This is not my work, but it's a costume from the Ballet Russe, Diaghilev, I think that's how you say his name, early 1920s, and I love the modernity of the costume. I'm not sure why I'm showing this, except it's just interesting to me. It's inspiring to me. I think I really like the colors, I like the forms, and I imagine what it would look like as a body in motion. So those are some recent paintings, and I wanted to show you also my ceramic work, which I'm doing at the same. It's another practice that I'm always working on. Hold on. So 2 years ago, let's see, before I started doing this series of paintings with these sewn paintings, which I just showed you, I was, as two, maybe 3 years ago, I was sort of hitting a wall with my painting, and I'd been working after graduate school as a painter for several years, and just feeling frustrated and not knowing what I wanted to do next, and just feeling like I was hitting a wall. And someone had suggested that I look into ceramics, or I play with the idea of, making ceramic pots or something. And I thought that was a funny idea, and I thought I would try it. But I didn't know where to start. I didn't have any background in ceramics. So I looked at an artist called Beatrice Wood, this is a portrait of Beatrice Wood, a photograph of her, looking at one of her pots, 1961. So I'm not sure if you know who Beatrice Wood was. She just recently passed away at the age of 105. She'd led a very, very interesting life. And the more I read about her life, the more I became more inspired by her rather than looking at her pots and her ceramic sculptures. I think they're great and they're technically very beautiful, but I'm less interested in her work than I was. I realized I was more interested in her than her work, let's say. So I began to read her autobiography, and her autobiography was divided up into chapters, and that each chapter was a significant person who touched her in her life, a friend, a lover, a mentor. So this is one of them. One of her friends and lovers. This is Edgar Varèse, who was an avant-garde composer. He was French. She met him in the 19-teens, and I believe they had a love affair. And he taught her. She came from a very bourgeois background, and he kind of taught her how to be a little bit more avant-garde. And he kind of introduced her into the Dada scene in New York in 1916, 1917. And that's where she met Marcel Duchamp, who I'm sure you're all familiar with, and that's how. And then she also met Picabia, and she became friends with Mina Loy, who was a very famous, well-known poet. And so she became involved in the Dada scene, and she began drawing and painting, and just had this very interesting, rich life. Later, in the late 1920s. She decided to leave New York and move to California to become a potter. So she taught herself how to throw pots and how to work with clay and so on. And she ended up becoming a self-reliant potter in a time when women certainly weren't, it was just pretty radical for a woman to do that at the time. This is like the early 30s. She moved up to a town called Ojai, north of Los Angeles, and she became a follower of Krishnamurti, who is an Eastern philosopher and very important figure to her. So she followed him and traveled with him. She ended up traveling to Tokyo. Anyway, she had a fantastic life. I could go on about it. But how is that about my work? So I was using her life as a way to begin to get into ceramics. So I decided to make these abstract portraits of her friends and lovers. So these are a few of the portraits that I did. I'm just learning how to work with clay at this point. But here you can see this like investigation turned into a whole series of abstract portraits of Beatrice Wood's friends and lovers. And so again, this idea of using the medium as a medium. So I was using the medium of clay as a medium in the sense that I might call up ghosts. So in a kind of a spiritual sense, and I kind of don't mean that I don't mean that in a cheeky way. I kind of was really using it as a medium. And these are not thrown pots, they're hand-built, so they're made with a kind of a coiling technique with sculpture clay, which is a very heavy-bodied clay, lots of very gritty. And some of them are about 30 inches tall, some of them are a bit smaller. But anyway, just to go through some of the names, this is Anaïs Nin up at the top, Constantine Brancusi, who she knew and visited his studio often, Edgar Varèse, the composer I mentioned, Francis Picabia, Louise and Walter, her husband. They're Arensbergs, very important collectors. They're some of the first collectors to be involved with the Dada works and first to collect Marcel Duchamp. Krishnamurti, Henri-Pierre Rocher, who wrote the story Jules and Jim, which was turned into the Truffaut film. And then there were a lot of other important people. Mina Loy is down there. She married this man called Steve at the bottom. Sorry about this little shadow thing, who was really kind of a bastard. But she was in her 50s and she didn't need to be married, but for some reason they were drawn to each other. So it's just a portrait of her life through clay. So I ended up presenting the work as a kind of a giant group portrait in a gallery in Berlin. And it's called Nice and Fit, and this was 2 years ago. And so what I did was I presented on one wall kind of a recreation of my studio wall, which involves clippings from magazines. And I mean, a lot of this project involved a lot of research because I wasn't just looking at Beatrice Wood's life, but I also learned more about Picabia, for example, or or a magazine that Duchamp and Rocher and Beatrice Wood co-published called The Blind Man in 1917, which had to do with the Armory show of 1917. So I have bits of the Blind Man from there. I have pictures of the Arnsberg's house. I have pottery magazines, this and that. And this is just a recreation of my studio wall to give the viewer a sense of where this is all coming from, because they are abstract pots, but the element of its art history is very important as well. So here we have my group portrait again. And the pieces were hollow, and that's important because they're meant to be ghosts, and they're also not functional. They're sculpture, so I liked that tension between, sort of from afar they might seem to be semi-useful or utilitarian objects, but as you get closer you realize that they're portraits and they're abstract and they're sculpture. Here's a good group portrait of them, and I kind of like this tension between functionality and non-functionality, and I think in my paintings you get that too, because from afar the paintings just appear to be hard-edged geometric paintings, but then as you get close you see that they're sewn the way you would sew a quilt or the way you would make a piece of clothing. So there's this kind of play between craft and fine art, and sort of hopefully pulling out the rug from under the high arts of painting and sculpture. The works fall between usefulness and non-usefulness. Here's a view from above. So that's a recent body of ceramic work. And then at the same time, this right here is, sorry, I can zoom down. This is the announcement card for that show, and I like it. It's a collage, and I just like it because it's basically a picture of Beatrice Wood, one of Beatrice Wood's pots, but I cut out the actual work and made it something abstract, something different, because it's not about her work. In fact, it's about her, and it kind of has this ghostly feel. So then, anyway, that's the announcement card for that show. At the same time, I've also I did another ceramic project recently. This came after the hand-built vessels and before the paintings too, actually. This is a show called Ceramics and Other Things in Berlin, and it's a collaboration with an artist called Paulina Oloska, who is a Polish, originally Polish, but she lives in Berlin. She was invited to do a residency at the DAAD. It's basically a government-supported residency where they support artists to come and live in Berlin in these beautiful apartments, and they give money for exhibitions. It's a great, great program. And so they invited her, and then she invited me to do a collaborative exhibition and project together. So we decided to do a ceramic tile mosaic, and this is a picture of it in the gallery. And let's see, so what we did was we took some of the funding and we went to Greece, and we went to an island called Skopelos, where they had a ceramic workshop, and we made hundreds of tiles. So these are some of my tiles, and they're made by using the local clay on the island. And so a lot of these forms, some of them, and a lot of them are coming from the work that I started to do with the painting at the same time, and I was looking a lot at David Smith and his steel sculptures, so I think there's a lot of that coming in there. Paulina she focused more on the idea of the tile, but the industrially made tile, and she did a lot of glazing and decorative surface work. She painted some of the tops of the tiles and spray painted some things, but she was really more about color and surface, and my work was really more about form. But we wanted to somehow integrate the two work together, and so we had these platforms built. And we kind of liked the idea of the archaeological museum or like an archaeological display, and so we found these, they were low platforms, and then we found these theatrical lamps, and we lit them. And the people at the opening were really interested in sort of kneeling down, and they wanted to pick up the tiles and sort of examine them, and I liked how people became really interested in engaging with the work. The tiles were not fixed on the platforms, they're placed, and they can be rearranged. So if we were going to exhibit them in another way, we would do a completely different arrangement. The work really became about arrangement and a collective experience, because we sort of spent, I guess it was 12 or 13 days we spent rearranging the tiles, and it was like making a different painting every day. We kept coming in, and then I would move some of her pieces, and then she would move some of my pieces. I guess it could have gone on for months, but we had to stop at some point because we had to put on the show. And so then after that, the idea of thinking of at least my works especially as moving around parts of a painting, I liked that idea, and so I presented this work back at the same gallery where I showed the hand-built vessels as paintings. And so what I did here is, if you see the black square, the black rectangle, that's actually painted on the wall directly with a roller and tape. So it looks like a painting, but it's actually painted directly on the wall. And then the tiles, we figured out a way to fix the tiles on the wall using actually industrial strength Velcro, which you can put on and take off, but it's very strong and nothing fell off. Here's another one. This is an off-white background with these tiles stuck on. So that was another example of sort of rearranging parts of a painting and then figuring out a way to fix them on the wall. So they become painting, but they're also sculpture and they're also installation. They kind of fall somewhere in between, and I like that relationship. And so that work was presented with this artist here. His name is Janice Morales, and he's an artist who died recently at the age of 94. So it was a pairing of me and a real modernist, a Greek modernist, that the gallerist knew, and he's quite known in Athens, although a lot of people in America don't know who he is. But we thought it was a really interesting pairing, especially with the relationship of forms and so on. So these are two lithographs, a steel sculpture of his, and then my mosaic paintings. Here's a detail of one of the paintings. Here's another one. So then another very recent investigation I've been working on in the studio is I've been doing wood sculptures, wood reliefs. And these are made they're actually made in a similar way that the mosaics were made. With the mosaics, I kind of rolled out slabs of clay and then cut them using cut pieces of cardboard as a kind of a guiding line as the hard edge, and then I would cut the clay and then fire it. These were made using similar forms, but obviously you can't roll out the wood, but I was using that as a way to draw out these forms, and then I'd cut them with a jigsaw, and then they're painted with layer and layer of acrylic paint, and then arranged endlessly, it seems like, on a backing of wood, and then finally glued together. These are only about 16 by 20 inches, so they're kind of small. But this is a completely new kind of direction for me, but you can see the connections with the ceramic work, especially the mosaics and the paintings. So just to go back a little bit about the paintings. So I was doing the ceramics, and then but I felt that I was doing the ceramics and then I started doing the painting. So the ceramics became a way for me, as I said, I had reached a block with my painting, so going through ceramics allowed me to get back into painting again, and but in a completely different way. So somehow it worked for me. But I always go back to this photograph because of its sense of humor. Yeah. No, anyway, that's my inspiration and that's my work. And if you have some questions, I'd be happy to answer some questions. I think so, right? It is? Oh, thank you. Come again? Yeah, so I could show you a couple, we could look at a couple details of those. I could show you. So you can see some of these here. So if you look at some of the details, you see like little handles that are becoming ears. You see holes or orifices that one might think you would pour liquid out of, but they're actually eyes, or they could be seen as eyes. You could see a heaviness at the bottom, which could be a pot belly, or a thin neck, or a large opening at the top here, representing openness or something. A handle, which could be also, originally it was the intention that it would be a handle, but then it became a mouth. And so I'm kind of using these things as a way to get to the personality of the person that I'm trying to not reproduce, but evoke, let's say. And but I'm trying to keep it open and abstract. And it's also my own it's my way of looking at Duchamp, but through the lens of Beatrice Wood, and also through the lens of all of the research that I've been doing. So there's a lot of me there too. It's not simply this cold project of sort of simply research. There's also a lot of emotion there too, and so it's all the baggage that I might have about Duchamp or Picabia or whoever it is that I'm looking at or investigating, but also trying to manifest that physically. The show's called Hand-Built Vessels, and I mean that in a literal way because they're hand-built vessels, but also in the kind of evocative, poetic way of a human is a vessel, and it's made by hand. A lot of my work and the craft element is very important to my work, and craft in the sense of handmade, not craft in the sense of a preciousness, or I'm not attached to technique in a precious way. I'm interested in learning through making and learning through using your hands, and I think that's an important way that artists learn, rather than just reading or just listening. It's really the physicality of that, yeah. Yes? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Could you say that last part again? For the viewers? Yeah, well, the work is very, very personal. I think my favorite subject in the world is art history, and when I was really stuck with making paintings, I began to think, well, what's my favorite thing in the world? Well, it's going to museums, especially modern art museums, and I grew up going to modern art museums and looking at the work and trying to identify it without looking at the label on the wall. It's sort of being like, I know that one, and specifically this hard-edged geometrical moment in art history in the 1950s, well, in the 20s and so, but then later in the 50s and early 60s. And I'm from Los Angeles, and there was this real moment going on at that time. So it's kind of like a bit of my own childhood history, looking at those magazines growing up and so on. But also when you look at that hard-edged work, you think, oh, it's so simple, it's so easy, it's just so basic or whatever. But to actually make a painting like that is quite hard, and I wanted to learn about that. Not necessarily how to make a perfect minimalist painting, but like what makes these artists tick, and how come this work has so much soul, but it seems so cold? What is it all about? So for me, the way to find out what the art is all about, was really about cutting it up and taking it apart and painting it, but using my own palette, let's say, or changing a few details, or focusing on one cropping one part of one painting, and then remaking it, and then putting it back together. It's kind of like an act of love and an act of like an homage, and I'm not doing this in an ironic way. I'm doing it as a way of learning about art history and appreciating it, and representing it also as, you know, me being one very small part of this long, interesting story of art history, but of modern art history, of modernism. Also, finally, like, I wanted to know what does modernism mean? I think that's a word that comes up a lot lately. It's the new modernism, it's postmodernism, and modern this, modern that, but what does it really mean? Is modernism a way of approaching doing something, or is it a style? I don't think it's just a style. I mean, I think there's a lot of interpretations, and I'm trying to figure out what that is. Beatrice Wood was modern to me because she was a self-sufficient woman artist in a time when nobody was doing that, but is that what modernism? Anyway, it's an ongoing question. I don't know the answer, but how it's interesting, how the personal side, your second part of the question was how other people will get that, I think. I don't know. I think through seeing my little mistakes and sewing errors and sort of like brush strokes and things, I think you see the me in there, and you see my relationship with art history, and I don't know. I think it's there. I hope so. Yes?
I'd like to hear more about Steve 1 and Steve 2.
Okay, so Steve, of her whole autobiography, it's called I Shock Myself. It's a paperback biography, and you can find it anywhere. It's really interesting, full of funny stories about her life. And later to the end, there's the Steve chapter, and he was just the one person in her whole history who was just a real jerk. And he was cantankerous, and he fought with people, and he was mean and tried to sabotage her. Like, couldn't figure out why they were together, because she's such a lovely, joyous, optimistic person. So I don't know. I thought him having, it was a really kind of dark heart. So this is it's kind of a steel glaze I began to experiment with. It's a metallic kind of like a rusty steel color, and it's the first time I did a vessel like that. I did that, and then it stood out too much, so I made a second one that was just a simple form, and then I thought they were really interesting together, and I placed them together. Maybe he really isn't such a horrible person, so he has this, I don't know. This was just me kind of having a sense of humor about the project, and yeah. Yes?
Can you talk a little bit more about the wall of media collection at graduate school?
Yeah. Well, it was, I graduated in 2002, and I always knew that it was important to just keep working every day if I wanted to be an artist, and so I got a studio, as we all do, in New York, and it was a tiny little thing that I could hardly afford the size of this podium, and you just, I didn't know what I wanted to say, but I knew that I had to work every day, and so I kept making these paintings, and they just weren't going anywhere, and I had periods of showing and periods of making successful work, but overall I was kind of disgruntled about painting, not about art or the art world, but just about painting, and feeling like maybe a lack of community or something. So then in 2007, like 5 years later, 2007, I guess, that's when I said, forget it, I'm stopping painting. And and then someone just by chance at a party suggested ceramics, and I thought, well, why not? I should try a different medium, and it kind of worked. By going deeply into a different medium, I was able to come through the back door of painting and make paintings again that are more objects anyway, but yeah. Mhm.
painting or your creative questions, or did you wait a few years?
Uh, like how I just stuck with it.
Applying for exhibitions or
Well, I never,
wait to
yeah.
paint? How does this happen?
I actually, I have to say, I never got anywhere by applying anywhere or showing my slides randomly to people. I don't think that's not the way that worked for me. The way that worked for me was staying social and staying, seeing my friends and going visiting their studios, whether they were showing or not showing. It didn't matter, just continuing to stay in a dialogue with other artists and supporting each other and finding that community. But the best thing for me was I always had a job as an artist assistant in New York. I've been living in New York, and I've worked for several different artists that are quite known and or lesser known. But like working in another artist's studio that is successful, I think teaches you learn the sort of practical sides of things, and you have lunch together and you gossip and you work on their images and you make sure that they're sized the right way and so on, and you learn about all those all those practical things that I don't know if that's taught in every art school. That's important stuff. Yeah. Yes.
Can you talk about the relationship of your paintings to textile, or like why you stretch them as opposed to just having them be like pieces of stretching fabric?
Yeah, I do think it's so. I was talking about that place where the paintings live between functional and non-functional, and I'm really interested in that place where you have a painting on the wall and it's a stretched painting, like my painting is, and you are 10 feet away and it looks just like a normal, everyday hard-edged geometric painting, and you get closer and closer, and 5 or 4 steps away from the painting, you see that it's sewn, and you see that it's an object. And I like that place, that moment where you kind of are a little bit lost and you don't know how to read it. And so for that reason, I stretch them. I think it would be beautiful to do sewn like curtains, like I was showing you the works that are kind of inspired by the early modernist theater. And I keep thinking now it'd be interesting to do a backdrop, like just a sort of like a heavy canvas backdrop that's made by sewn and painted parts. I'm not sure how that would work out, but with a particular body of work that I showed you at the gallery, they were really between painting and craft, and so that's why they were stretched. Yeah.